Happy birthday.
I leave the clapping to my daughter.
Anybody wants to sing, I won't start that.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, oh Steve. Happy birthday to you. Are you 30 today?
Pardon me?
30?
Right, my next one is 10.
All right, let's go ahead and jump right into it here. You'll see that Dr. Rogers from Dixon Middle School will be doing our pledge and meditation. Then we'll have some recognitions there under exemplars of East Hamilton High School girls soccer team and also state champion teams from Signal Mountain High School. Our presentation on Thursday night will be COVID task force update. Does anybody have a question or comment about that item?
Chairman, just a bit more. So we have a survey out right now. The survey closed. The thing we're looking at closing, I bet this is where runs. So one of the things we're looking at is, or getting feedback around is not so much the gating criteria from the standpoint of changing the thresholds, but how we might operate within the thresholds based on what we learned. And so, and the data that we have. And so we're trying to get feedback around that. The other thing that we're really trying to get feedback around is we some of these expectations, all these expectations really, we put them upon ourselves as a district in trying to be as transparent as possible and put numbers out there to really show our thinking. One of the things we really heard really early on from parents in particular is that, they wanted most of information so they didn't feel so many swings back and forth, open, close, online versus whatever. We're trying to get feedback. That's created immense challenge, in particular over the last few weeks as the cases have really fluctuated a lot. And so we're trying to get feedback on the survey around explicitly what we might do, how much time is needed in between announcements of phases and decisions and things of that nature. So those are a couple of really high-level things that we're getting feedback on within the, and again, going back to the earlier point, the gating criteria, by grade band, do we want to operate a little bit differently based on what we've learned is showing and telling us that's coming out. So we anticipate on Thursday that survey will be closed. We'll be able to share those very raw numbers and results based on that. I think today there's at least 10,000 respondents, over 10,000 respondents who actually were just glancing at that a few moments ago. So good participation. Those that have not participated, we ask that you do. So just a couple of things there. Ms. Thurman.
Yes. Having had my 5-year-old granddaughter at work with me all day, and I already was booked from 7:30 this morning until right before I came. So when I finished work today, I had to sit at the computer with her, trying to get her work call up because her mother was still at work. I can feel the pain of these things and some of these mothers. I just don't know what the people are going to do. I don't know what we expect them to do. The numbers that we came up, I asked in the beginning where these numbers came from. They were very arbitrary. At that time, we didn't know things about this virus, didn't know anything about it. We know a whole lot more now than we did then. We, at some point, have to take a real raw look instead of just looking at the cases and everybody getting all up in arms about the cases. How is it affecting our schools? At the time, we were one of the first people to come back to school, one of the first school systems to come back to school. Now, when everybody else who's been out of school is now rushing to get back in school because they realize how it's affecting their students, and it seems like we've almost gone backwards for that. I realize that the numbers are probably up, but in school, how we've been treating this, some of these teachers have been off 10 days here, and they'll be at work a few days, and then they're off another 10 days, and then they're back to school another 10 days. We have to get a handle on that. I think tonight we're going to be probably discussing, exactly who can be off and what do we consider being exposed. Were you in the same room with somebody? Were you in the same bed with somebody? Were you in the same car with somebody? Were you in the same restaurant as somebody? Those things all look a whole lot different. Were you in the same church with somebody? Maybe you didn't even see the person in church. They were in another Sunday school class, and you were in all sanctuary together on the other side. What does that look like? Is that really being exposed? I think those are the things that we need to look at, because I'm telling you what we are calling educating students, doing this is not educating students. And the students, the most at-risk students that we have, the ones that we have spent so much time trying to close the achievement gap, we have just totally annihilated any progress that we made in lessening the achievement gap. Because I tell you, the students whose parents are at home, or the students whose parents are more hands-on, their kids are going to get their work. They're going to get things done. But a lot of these kids don't have that kind of help at home. And those are the ones that were behind to begin with, and they're getting further and further behind. We will never, never catch up the year's worth of education these students have lost. And it's enough to just really, sometimes my insides just shake because it just makes me so angry. Because what we're doing to these students, we're never going to be able to fix. And I think we really need to take a long, hard look at how is this affecting students. And keep that as the center point, because a lot of parents who are afraid for their kids to go back to school, they have an option of keeping them at home. But we are going to have to get a handle on this education, because like I say, some of these kids are falling so far behind, and to me it's heartbreaking. The little students that are home with parents that, already don't feed them breakfast and don't give them baths and stuff like that. You think they're going to sit down and make sure they get their work on the computer? No, they're not. And that my heart breaks for those students. And those are the kids we need to be looking at instead of focusing so much on how many people are in the hospital, because we realize now that the students are not the one in the beginning. They said the students were the carriers. We found out that was wrong. We found out so many things in the beginning that we thought we knew that we didn't know. And so I think we just need to update maybe the way that we're looking at this whole COVID situation, especially in view of the fact that there's going to be a vaccine. How many students have been actually really sick? How many teachers have been really sick? How many have been hospitalized, and that sort of thing. That we are going to have to get these kids in the classroom in front of teachers, especially the elementary school age. Trying to keep my 5-year-old granddaughter in front of that computer is just almost impossible. And they want to wander off and look at other things, the dog walks by or something like that. Next thing you know, they're off track. But I'm just telling you, we're going to look back at this and we're going to see so many mistakes we've made. And I know, like I said, we're the first school back in session, and I applaud that, and I thank Dr. Johnson for having the courage to do that. But this on again, off again, parents have no vacation days left. They have no sick days left, and they cannot just take off from work because they will lose their job. And it's right here at Christmas time. A lot of parents right now are not able to work. That may not bother you, but that bothers me. What about the students? What we're doing to them, y'all, is just not right. These kids need to be in school. They need to be with their friends. They need to have some hope. We've already taken so much away from them. I've even almost changed churches during this because our church doesn't do anything with youth because everybody was so scared. So I went to church and they are doing things with youth. Just so my grandkids could get something. I've been going with my daughter. But I know a lot of people, if they could do something else about school, they probably would too. And so, you know, it's just very disturbing to me, and I think it's something we need to look at, how this is affecting the students. And let's worry about that more, let's talk to the students about what they want to do, about what they, you know, how it's really affecting them. And instead of worrying so much about adult issues that are not kid issues. Like I say, it's just disturbing. I hear it at Christmas time, parents off from work for 2 weeks, it may not be a big deal to you, but it's a big deal to a lot of people. And I just think that's who we need to think about.
Mr. Perez, did you,
No,
Mrs. Robertson?
So I wanted to give you some feedback that I've heard from a number of parents, they have not seen or received the survey. So I didn't know if there was maybe a way to go back in and block. I know that you guys are putting it in these updates, I just read the daily update, but there's still a lot of parents that are not seeing this survey.
Yeah, we'll push it again. I mean, we started pushing it on, I'm a parent, I got mine, on email and text. But we will, I guess a couple of things. One, if you have specific parents that may have had challenges in getting it, please encourage them to reach out direct to the school. Let's see if there's a phone number issue with our direct push service to that number. But we will absolutely, over the next couple of days, just continue to do blitzes to try to get folks to take advantage of taking the survey. We've been pointing out, put out, Shannon's got to go back and look at this a little bit closer, but we always watch Missionary Ridge and Midtown in particular because we, want to make sure that they're being active on it. It looks pretty consistent when we look at just a cursory review in other learning communities as far as participation rates. But we're tracking right now, our high point or it feels like we've been in COVID so long. But our high point was about 25,000 respondents. We're over 10,000. That was a little earlier today. And so, it's tracking pretty strong and we'll make another push here over the next couple of days.
Okay, that's great. I just thought this would be a good opportunity to give you that feedback because I'm hearing it from parents that normally are on top of it. And of course, there is a lot going on right now. It's hard to not feel inundated. I did want to also make sure that we are being really intentional in how we get this survey out to our Latino community. Definitely from everything we've gone through this summer and with the reopening, I have noticed so much on our barrier to communicating to that community. So I just want to make sure we're getting their feedback. So my desire overall is just that I want to see that number as close to 40,000 as possible. Absolutely. Because this is such an important survey. So absolutely,
we completely agree. And contextually, just so y'all know, when we put out surveys, we usually have somewhere between 2,000 and 5,000 people that participate in the survey. We've seen very high participation in particular because it's such an important topic. We've seen very high. We saw very high in the spring. We saw very high in the summer. I want to re-accentuate something that's just on me to re-accentuate right now and to really re-elevate. I woke up every morning in COVID feeling like I'm in a no-win situation and trying to maneuver this.
That's because you are.
I wake up every morning knowing that, most of the time as a servant leader, you never will make decisions. I don't make decisions to make everybody happy. I want to be really clear about that. We make decisions based on, what we feel is best for everybody and what's best, first and foremost, for children. But you generally speaking, you can get consensus on, where you need to be in the decision-making process. This conversation is so political and so divided. I'll be honest that there's just not a clear-cut answer. And so I think to the points of the conversation earlier, absolutely, I want to make decisions best for children. At the same time, if I've got a building with 14 teachers that are close contacts or 4 or 5 positives and the others are close contacts in households, and the building has 30 teachers, it's tough to operate that building. You all know this year multiple times, and we're not above this, and we're here to do this. We go out and we serve schools and serve buildings. That's our job, and so we do that. Our team has been out on multiple occasions to do that, and we'll continue to do that wherever possible. But I do want to make sure you understand that the enormity of the task at hand it's a little more complex than just getting kids in school, because across the country, and no different in our district, there's a sub-issue. And so, you have, it's people, and you're out of people. And so it's trying to operate pretty complex system in the midst of a global pandemic. And I'll say we did open, early. And outside of these last couple of weeks, we've been very fortunate as a community because we've been able to remain in what we call phase 3. And when I look at the data, I like to think I give Keith and Colonel Brooks and Jim Bronson a ton of credit because really hitting that sweet spot of phase 3 has allowed us to be operational. But we know we have cases that are at an all-time high, and it's just the reality of where we are. I'll share this little tidbit of as a contextual story. It was last Monday as I'm walking the hallways of Whittle Middle School, because I want to make sure everybody understands the school's still going on as well. And so as I'm walking the hallways, the principal couldn't walk with me, which is fine. I would walk with whomever's available, coach, whomever's available. I don't have any preference for that. But the principal was in an IEP meeting that had about 20 staff members in it because it was a very, very delicate special ed situation that needed that intensive support. That very same day, she had 8 teachers that were out, and just, a myriad of things that are going on during the course of a normal school day. And so, what our teachers and principals are doing in the midst of this, it's never been anything like it. And I'm just speaking from my context because I've never seen anything like it. And I am proud of the way you all have challenged us with the way we're responding. I think to the point research has shown and is beginning to show that there are some things we need to look at in the elementary grade band in particular. And I think that's where some of the conversation is. I know that's where some of the conversation is, and hopefully will help us as we look at decision making. But we are in just really, really interesting and unprecedented times, and I'm very proud of the way our teachers and leaders have responded, and I'm proud of the way our students have responded. Is that Macy back there in the corner? Is that Macy? I can't see. No, it's not. I'm trying to I just see some hair on the side. I can't. Who is that back there? I don't know. But Macy Tidmore, I will share that Macy Tidmore said something to me on student advisory that I think really lets you know we know this is impacting students as well. She was just sharing on it, student advisory. She said, one of the things that I never would have thought about, and I didn't think about, she talked about pep rallies. She talked about, we hadn't had a pep rally all year, and we get it. That's part of the whole child development. That's why we've tried to make sure we can have sports and we can do some activities and some of these things with restrictions, but that we can do some of these things. So just know we wrestle with decision making all day and trying to do right, for everybody involved and trying to do right for children. That was the impetus for us getting back to school, and we'll continue to try to make decisions in that way or recommendations in that way.
Mr. Smith.
I wasn't.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
You took my floor time. I'm just kidding. Okay, so with the update, the task force update on Thursday, will we be talking at all about the on-site testing? I've been getting a lot of questions. I want to make sure I've got a chance to ask those questions promptly.
We can talk about on-site tonight. Tonight's probably a good night to talk about it, so we don't have Thursday night. But
if they're giving an update on that information, I want to tell people to watch it because what they're doing is they're making up, stories about it. And so I want to squash those rumors.
Yep. So I can bring some context to on-site testing right now, just so that that presentation can be focused around what we're getting out of the survey. So here's the bottom line around the on-site testing. We were one of 7 districts in the state, part of the Tennessee Health Department pilot of one of 7 systems in the state. Actually the first system selected to have a pilot around rapid testing. It is completely optional. It's not something that's done every day for every student that comes in. It's not even done for students right now. We don't look to the student phase in until January. It is for symptomatic situations. Employees have access to it. Students have access to it with parent consent. And so we'll never administer a test, without a parent consent. It's not something that's going to be done every day. It's not an entry criteria like you're going to be tested if you don't want to. And then even if you're symptomatic, I'll add this last piece. Even if you're symptomatic, If you don't want the test won't be administered. And so, you know, a couple of things I think are really important to know. We know the health department is inundated right now. We know that from a testing standpoint. We also know from a contact tracing standpoint. That's why we, again, you credit our folks taking on the contact tracing piece. And in an effort to get results back as intentionally as possible so that we can contact trace and so that we can continue the mitigation. This is a pilot seen statewide as something that's a viable option. So non-mandatory, not a requirement, you know, it's just it's an opportunity for anybody that wants it to have access to a rapid test that's a student or an employee in our district.
Thank you.
Mr. Smith?
You're right, you're in a no-win situation, no matter whatever you do, it's gonna be wrong. I did find it interesting, a couple of weeks ago, you know, when the decision was made to go to phase 2 with the high school kids, and how that was widely applauded, particularly with K through 5 kids, widely applauded. From parents, from teachers, you know. And of course now the decision being made to, you know, to go to the phase 2 with everybody. And my wife is a preschool teacher at the YMCA. And, they, back during March, they shut down for about 30 days and they've been full bore ever since. No issues whatsoever, zero, none. And then with the program that I'm running now, you know, I've got mostly elementary school kids, 10, 11-year-olds, no issues, zero, none. So I really hope that y'all are really taking a hard look at that, particularly with the K through 5. They came today, I just left the kids just a minute ago, and they got their devices. And boy, they're just tickled to death, you know, with those new devices they got. But I just worry about what Ms. Thurman spoke to, those kids, you know, falling behind and being able, you know, to do the work they're going to be asked to do. So just an encouragement, and again, understanding that no matter what you do, you're going to be wrong. You're wrong, no matter what you do. But applaud you and the whole staff for what we've been able to do up to this point. It's amazing what we've been able to do. But I really take a hard look, particularly at that K through 5. That's my comment. Now I got a question. I've gotten several emails over the last few days about testing, kind of on a different level, but about parents that maybe have chosen virtual or chosen homeschool, but now they're being asked to go to the school to take a particular test. And I don't really understand how all that's working. I mean, if they chose, they don't want to go to school because they're afraid, but now they're being asked or required to come to school to take that state mandated test.
10 ready, well, 10 ready is going on as well. So in the high schools, so a couple things there. Yes, we are looking at the surveys out K2. It's banded, so it's K2, 3, 5, 6, 8, 9, 12, and absolutely, I think to your point, that's one of the things we're digging into with K5, and then also the split at K2. So for testing, schools are working through that. It's just really challenging. You know, so 10 ready, maybe some benchmark out there. Generally speaking, the first iteration of benchmark, a lot of parents, you know, had no issue with coming in. They isolate them, take it, you know, and move on. If there is question, concern, we've asked schools just to work with those individual students and parents and families in a multitude of ways. I think one of the things we heard from the governor, you all heard this as well, is that you know, and obviously this has to go through the legislative body. A lot of conversation will be had, I'm sure, about that this summer, or not this summer, but in the winter when they return to session. But he's talked about the fact that he wanted testing to go forward, but accountability to make it look different, right, and not necessarily to count. And I think the example you raised is a result of that, right? It's can I get the student there? Can I get access? Can I get the student access to the assessment, et cetera? I was just on a call with Gerald Harris, and that was a big point of conversation. How do we make sure we get the kids there to be assessed? I'm having challenges getting the kids there, and just knowing that there's going to be some challenge right now. So we'll just encourage those parents to reach out to the school. I've seen a couple of instances where there are alternative plans that are worked out, and generally speaking, that's able to be worked through on a case-by-case situation. 78% of the time, they don't mind it. The parent doesn't mind it, and that's the most straightforward, easiest way for test security purposes. I was in particular with T and Ready. Is you have to come in and take it. But benchmark and other district, based things, we can obviously work through that and navigate that on a case by case.
Yeah, is the building leadership, have they been instructed to do what you just said, to look at a case by case and try to work with those parents?
Yeah.
Because I got one parent that said that there's nothing we can do.
Yeah, so it may be T and Ready. If you'll send that case to me, this situation, send it to me, let me look at what it is. Is it T and Ready? Is it something different? What are the options? Everybody's in a new world of thought partnering through some of these things, and so it's, they're really, it's case by case. The school leaders are doing the best they can, and so, sometimes our team, we have to think through it and partner through thinking what are the options in the midst of it as well. So we've got some of that, and we know that's the season that we're in right now. We'll finish an assessment, and we'll navigate them on a case by case. Yeah.
Sorry.
One other thing, if you're gonna be wrong no matter what you do, err on the side of the students.
All the time.
Err on the side of the students.
Always do.
We had a superintendent one time, he had 3 words for his motto: serve your public. That's why we're here.
Yep.
3 words: serve your public. And if we do that, we're 90% there. Err on the side of students. Thank you.
Go ahead, Ms. Ross.
I just want to make a comment. I've had multiple conversations with Dr. Johnson about the fact that our kids need to be in school, and about the fact that data is now pointing to the fact that younger students, are not necessarily the root of the spreading. And so I guess I just want to make it clear that I know I personally have had multiple conversations with him about why we're doing this survey, and it's to get to really like a lot of Rhonda's point, which is to get as many kids into school as possible. So I don't know if every person is having these conversations with Dr. Johnson. I'm sure you all are on some level, but I at least just wanted to say that I've had this conversation with him probably now 3 times. And I'm really proud of the survey that is being put out, and also hope that we can get kids into school too, 4 or 5, whatever it is, days a week. But I just want to at least say that I think he hears all of us and our concerns, and that we just need to remember that and give him the benefit of the doubt of that. So, because he hears us and he's talking to all of us. I think about this, and what's going on right now, reevaluating, is a response to those conversations, at least the conversation that I've had, and I'm sure you and all of you have had with him. So I want to say that.
And trust me, we've had many conversations.
Yeah.
Very many conversations. And I know that he feels a lot like I do. What I'm saying is, he's the top.
Yeah.
He makes the decisions. We can do all the surveys we want, but as we know, if you get a parent group or a teachers group and they get all their people together, hundreds of people, they can flood surveys, and we know what needs to be done. And right there's the guy to do it. He's our employee. And so I tell him what I think, and all of us need to tell him what we think. And Dr. Johnson knows that, because I think he feels a whole lot like we do. And I'm not saying, but I'm saying that it's our decision. We tell him what we think, and I very, very plainly, I don't mince words too well. I tell him exactly how I feel about it, and along with a lot of the data that I've seen and know to be a fact. And so, and like I said, the survey is going to be fine. We do need to know how parents feel, but a lot of times parents don't see a lot of the data that we see. This is our decision, his decision, ultimately. And so that's why I want to redo, if we have to redo the whole phase thing or whatever we have to do, we need to do it and fix this, because time is of the essence. Half of this school year is gone. It's gone. And when we come back in January, what's it going to look like in January? it's gonna be same fiasco, you know, this is here today, there tomorrow, you know. What's that gonna look like? Are they gonna lose another whole year? The kids are gonna be a year and a half behind if we don't get a handle on this. We have to stop the bleeding. We must get these kids back in school.
Yeah, I think most of it is that.
Let me just give a couple critical points, and I think we're hitting all of our, the presentation Thursday will be great, because so we've been in school 82 days, and we've had 42 schools that haven't had to close. We've had about 20 schools that have had to close just one day. We've administered a benchmark. When we look at that benchmark, we see that, in particular, y'all seen these results, but in elementary and middle in particular, we see that the learning slide or loss, it's just not there. We do see science and social studies right out of highlighter where we've got work to continue to do. And I think in large part why we haven't seen that slide is because we did some things this summer with REACH. Our teachers have done really a great job with navigating online learning in, just like in a pivot. And parents, I think to the point that have students online have really stepped up and helped out as they always do. We recognize that we have students, and our school leaders recognize that we have students that opted for online, that for some, that may not have been the best option, and I give our principals a ton of credit and school leaders because they went and started recruiting, many of them did, those students to come back on campus where it made sense and where there was room in classes. And so it's just been over this last couple of weeks where obviously the case volatility has just increased, and it's caused us to tip over into phase 2, and we hadn't been in phase 2 outside of the beginning period of implementing the gating criteria. So we want to continue to mitigate against learning loss and anything that may happen in that regard, but just know that we're committed to it.
Mrs. Hill.
Brian, thank you for elevating the most recent benchmark data and the fact that it illustrates that we haven't had the catastrophic learning loss that we feared that we might. As I find myself inundated with feedback from the community as well as staff about how we handle reopening school safely and teaching during COVID. And as we talk about this as a board and with Dr. Johnson, the thing that comes to my mind is that we are all on the same team. And in March, when we made the difficult decision to close schools, throughout the spring and summer, we had a lot of conversation about how we were better together. And there was a lot of joyful, hopeful sentiment as children were fed during the day, as churches rallied, as community organizations rallied, as we got Wi-Fi for our students and devices when they needed them. This has not been a fiasco, but it has been incredibly difficult. And it will continue to be difficult, and I think that as we grow weary, we can lean into the fact that we are on the same team. We as a board, Brian, teachers, students, families, it's hard. But we're in it together and fighting one another or approaching things as if we are at odds with our end goal isn't going to help our kids. So I agree from a different perspective that absolutely we need to put our students first. And just remember that they're all of our kids. They're all Hamilton County kids, and we're all Hamilton County citizens, and we're in it together. We're on the same team.
All right. Yes, Mr. Perez.
So as well, I want to thank you for the work that you've done in, as we've said before, a year that nobody wishes on, even though we're standing straight. I think we've done a good job. I think to the point that Ms. Hill made, I think one of the concerns that I'm seeing is a break in that relationship on a general level, a sense of distrust from one side to the other, and so I do think we've learned a lot since July about the virus, about its effects in if we mitigate some of the risks in school and how we can potentially do things in a different way, unique way. I also agree, and you've said it many times, our students at home, you know, we've talked about equity a couple times, and you can't talk about equity and then say that those who don't have the support structures are going to be all right. You know, like, no, we need to figure out how to care for those because they're not going to be all right, and that's, you know, that's a fear not only here, but it's across the country and across the world. Really is a generation, you know, really being affected by this. So I thank you, because I think the pressure is there. I think one of the things that that is going to be important thing, you know, I've been quiet because Thursday we're going to get information, the public's going to get information, and I think that matters, not just on a survey, because surveys are you know, slanted by opinions, and right now everyone's an expert, right? But as we've learned a lot, I think it's just going to be important as we move forward, probably for another 6 months, if not a year, hopefully not, that we be continuously educated about what we're learning about this. Like, oh, well, we can do this safely. And I think safety for our students, for their families, for our teachers, for everybody involved is important. So, so as we go forward, I think it's just also crucial that we be educating ourselves about best practices, what is working, what isn't, and I mean, I'm going to throw this in there. I'm going to create enemies, I'm sure, but we start thinking that this year, you know, we may not end in May. We may not end. Like, we may have to do some things to keep safety at the forefront, while educating our students as much as we can inside of classrooms, or as long as we can, for also their growth and their academic well-being. And so it's you know, the equity issue brings to the forefront the fact that not everybody has a great place at home to continue their education, and we can't pretend that that is the case. We have to do everything in our capacity, while at the same time we have to be flexible for the safety of everybody. We've all said it. It's a no-win with no answers. I thank you. I thank the team. I thank the teachers. I thank everybody who's just been over backwards to, like, you know, serve our community. And I think there is fatigue, and I think people it's beginning to break trust. So I encourage us as a board and with your team to you know, put students first and try to bring everybody back. You know, I think we are heading. We do want the same outcomes, which is we want to be the best school that kept everybody safe, while kept them in school for as much as we could. So thank you for your work and, you know, struggles through this.
All right, let's move down there to bids and contracts then.
Sure. I think I saw Dr. Highlander, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I saw his cup going
Sorry.
on.
I just have a very brief statement. In Ron, Dr. Johnson, you said we looked especially at, I think, Missionary Ridge and Midtown. We have a lot of grandparents and parents and grandparents and great-grandparents raising children in the outer reaches of the county that also have trouble, that don't get on surveys, that don't get on Facebook, and that don't get on email. So the survey is, some of the people that need the survey the most are the ones who have the least access to it.
Yeah.
So just a comment there.
And just for clarity's sake, to you, yes, absolutely to your point. Just for clarity's sake, I just talking broad brush at the numbers comparison. When we look at the in count, the number of folks that have taken the survey in each learning community, that's kind of what we're tracking and monitoring. But yes, absolutely, we know it's a challenge in those areas as well.
All right, let's move down here to bids and contracts. Anything there under Roman numeral 8C that you would like to talk about? discuss? And then, the federal, grants, state grants, self-funded programs, there are a few listed there. Anything there that we need to address? All right, and that brings us down to board policies. These will all be second and final reads, so they'll be up for individual vote. No, they won't be. Ms. Ford, the way I read it on our agenda here, Mr. Bennett, you tell me, I know we've gone back and forth on this, but it looks like these all are falling up under the consent agenda. Is that correct, the way they're listed?
That's correct.
All right, so unless we pull one of these, or any of these, or all of these, they will all be approved on approval of the consent agenda. So just be aware of that. Go ahead, Dr. Hollander, do you have something?
There are a couple of these that I'd like to look at.
Sure.
Discuss. And I'll see some other cuts out too. I was looking at letter D and E. If anyone else would like to look at A, B, and C, I'll yield the floor to them.
That was you. All right, go ahead then, Dr. Hollander.
Okay, I'll do one at a time. On D, of course, is personnel health examination, communication disease. I'd like a little bit of clarification. Now, first of all, let me say, my greatest desire is for every teacher and every child to be safely in class 5 days a week. That's by far my greatest desire. That's best for education. For the first part of my question is this referring to these essential workers? Is that referring to central office personnel? Is it referring to teachers? Is it referring to whom is that referring? Dr. Johnson.
Gentleman, answer. And Scott can please chime in on this. The intent of this policy, we talked about it. It's for it's me, it's senior leaders in particular. But that's how that was the impetus for development and thinking through it and thinking about it. It was not for classroom. And let me put a final point on this, because I think it's a conversation I want to elevate. And I'm there tonight, so let's just go. Everything we've done and tried to do, this board has charged us with doing, has been about being open and clear and transparent and serving, right, our teachers, leaders, staff, students. If you go back and look historically, even as recent as a couple of months ago, when you all heard our plea for what we saw in buildings with teachers and them needing a calendar change as reprieve, you all graciously approved making those adjustments. I'll take you back to March when you all approved, proactively, which really was helpful. 2.5% pay increase. We've tried to do things to build and elicit, that trust word, and to continue to do those kinds of things. So to the point on this, when the essential employee conversation came, and that was, Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, that was like July, August, I think, when everybody was trying to get open. We absolutely, positively never considered it, as a part of our position for teachers or leaders in buildings, because we've always taken the approach, and I've always taken the approach culturally, and y'all just bear with me here for a moment so I can speak frank, that our teachers and our leaders, and myself included, like, we're in this profession because we want to serve and we see ourselves as essential. And I've really had to tell, professional, they're essential. So generally speaking, we don't have an issue with our teachers or leaders or staff members understanding that we need them, in order to, they're a critical part of our function. So thus we didn't need to see the policy. So really the emphasis of this policy was really more about those that do not have contact with children that may need to have access to work. And that's a
So the purpose
singular.
of this is for non-classroom people.
That's correct.
Okay,
And non-classroom, to be even more explicit, you know, non-classroom and really non-school based, ordinarily speaking, unless we're out of school. And I'll give a maintenance hypothetical. We could be on Christmas break and there could be a pipe that busts, and heaven forbid that happens, but a pipe bust, and we need a maintenance worker to go that's, you know, been deemed a close contact. The school is shut down and no kids in the building, nobody's in the building. We've only got so many plumbers that are trades, which is another conversation. And so we need that leak to be fixed. And so that's, you know, that's really the thought behind this policy. It's for the operation of a 7.5 million square foot school system.
totally understand that. Might be good if it's clarified in the policy.
Agree.
I think it would alleviate a lot of
Yeah.
major concern.
And I defer to Scott for that language.
And to that point, Dr. Highlander and Dr. Johnson, when we spell out in the policy that social distance has to be maintained, we can certainly put in there a reference to and not be around children, not be around students, to underscore that we're not talking about instructional personnel. We're talking about typically folks who are going to be working in isolation and who can wear the PPE. So we can make, between now and Thursday, we'll make some edits, and I'll send that out to the board.
Can I ask a question about that? How do you, here again, when you say they get exposed, I mean, that's such a broad.
Well, in this context,
thing.
that's a good point, but in this context, it's someone who's identified as a close contact based upon current guidance from the CDC. So all of this language is stuff that is following very closely guidance that we're getting from the Department of Health and the Department of Education. So we're not just making this up on the fly. We're referencing specific guidelines from the two state departments.
Because I know some people that have been in a restaurant and you get these notices that come out in the paper, you know, we're at so-and-so restaurant on these days. Well, that person may have been there in the morning, he may not have been there for dinner. I mean, you know, some people consider that being exposed. I don't, but some people do. And so, you know, maybe we need to.
I think if someone that reports to the central office and says, I'm a close contact of someone, then we're going to operate on the assumption that they're a close contact.
Yeah.
And so then the question becomes, okay, if they wish to continue to work, and if they fall within the application of this policy, their work cannot be done remotely. They are able to do their work wearing PPE. They're able to do their work while maintaining social distance. They don't have leave that they would rather utilize. And if the superintendent determines that this person really does need to come to work because of the nature of what they do, then in that instance, they can come to work. Now, the last thing I just said, the superintendent determines. That's going to be a decision made sparingly, because first of all, we're concerned about the health and safety of everyone. And second of all, as I had advised y'all, the insurance issues are real. And so we have to make these decisions conservatively. So it's going to be the business judgment of the superintendent who looks at the risk of having someone come to work versus the risk of having a very important job that doesn't get done. And so he weighs those decisions and makes a judgment. I've spoken with Dr. Highlander over the weekend about the possibility of having the board review that decision, and I've got some language I could plug into between now and Thursday. But at the end of the day, these decisions will be the exception rather than the rule.
Well, I don't have a problem with it. I mean, I understand completely where you're coming from, and I think sometimes we carry this thing way too far. So I don't have a problem with policy, maybe just look at clarify the language, but, I think, that's common sense to me, having a business, you understand there are things that happen.
There's certain things you gotta do. Yeah, and one of the things that I always am reluctant to do is to draft a policy that's specific to one snapshot in time, because guidance can change. And so I've tried to draft this in such a way that, heaven forbid, I hate to use this phrase, the next pandemic can be addressed with this as well. So there's a certain amount of play in here that's necessary so that Dr. Johnson can work with the public health authorities and develop a plan specific to those needs.
If I could finish, I was trying to start.
Oh, so sorry.
Mr. Vice Chairman, may I?
Yes.
Thank you both for that. I think what I want I'll say again, I want every student who's able to be in school to be there, every teacher who's able to be in school to be there. I think what some teachers are concerned with is that they were included in this, and Dr. Johnson has pretty much negated that. And not the general run of teachers, but those that have severe medical impairments that are documented. And I certainly think we need to be careful with those people that are heroes themselves. And I'm not talking about just everyone, those that have medical documentation. And I mentioned, Mr. Bennett, that a little bit of incongruity in this. Is it not, on line 26, it says, the director of schools shall reassign or suspend any employee who is suspected of having communicable disease which might endanger children's health, pending investigation and disposition of the case before the school board. And then at the end, it says, on the same issue, when the director exercises discretion pursuant to this policy, the director's decision shall be final. I think by and large, we will agree with him. If it's contested, I think that it should be able to be brought to the board. If it is contested by the employee so that it should be able to come to the board. You understand my point, Mr. Bennett?
I do, Dr. Hollander, and in fact, the language, the preceding language is a holdover from a policy from many years ago where the board actually did make these decisions. So there's a way now to harmonize that, and I'll do that, and I'll send that language out before Thursday.
Thank you.
Roger.
Go ahead, Ron.
No, I'm there.
Tucker, on D1E on the COVID professional conduct.
I think we might have some people that still talk about D.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Let's stay with the letter D there.
Okay.
Marco.
Is that okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I also spoke to Mr. Bennett this morning out of concern of this policy. So I'll share my concern first overall, and then specifically to a couple of the issues. But my concern, I feel we all have to say the same thing that Dr. Highlander started, because unfortunately there's a breach of trust there. But obviously we don't want anybody to get sick through this. I actually read this immediately, realizing that it's a policy that will be here far beyond COVID, right? And so we want to be protective of this right now and this in the future. And so let me rephrase. The first concern is the safety, because what I'm going to say is going to bring the administrator and me and the risk manager. And the administrator and me and the risk manager looks at this and says, we are transferring the knowledge and expertise from medical professionals to administrative individuals, while in the whole beginning of the policy, we highlight that we want a medical professional to give security to the fact that this person is in a state able to work in a school. So that's where I started getting nervous, is our school district can take on itself a liability by saying, we decided this person is essential and should go to work. There are a lot of protections, and as we discussed, there's protections in there. It has to be pursuant to the guidance of the Tennessee Health Department. I guess that's a protection. I'm looking there. We talked about the CDC, but it's not in there. So I think it would be wise as you draft, thank you, Scott, to define who is essential there. It's also important that one of those limits we see there is they cannot perform their function remotely. So if anybody can perform their function remotely and they have been exposed. And another item to what was commented is the fact that the employee chooses to continue working. So if I think I could be putting students at risk or anybody at risk, even if it's considered that essential, at least there's a space for the individual to say no, even though I know there could be consequences, and I think that's there. My other comment that I said to Mr. Bennett today was the director determines the employee, hold on, let me see where it is. Oh yeah, the employee remains asymptomatic and has not tested positive. That expression of has not tested positive is insufficient for me, because if I never go get tested, guess what? I've never tested positive, right? And so I actually want has tested negative, and now with some rapid testing, we should be able to say within a day this person has tested negative to the virus, and so we can at least protect ourselves in saying we did what we could to ensure that person without protections, without the virus went to work. So overall, my biggest concern is that I feel that we are, and I think we need to hear this as important. We've heard Mr. Bennett say multiple times the liability issues around infectious diseases and where we stand with COVID. We are removing from medical professionals the decision of whether a person is able to, or so I perceive, we're removing from medical professionals the decision of whether a person is able to be in a setting with other people. That's where I'm uncomfortable with this.
So to that point, and I certainly understand your concern. Any policy, any decision is going to be consistent with specific guidelines from the Department of Health. And the Department of Health this summer did put out specific guidelines for school systems if they chose to implement this particular policy. And those get updated regularly. So in much the same way that the school system is already implementing contact tracing protocols per the Department of Health guidelines, so too, if the administration chose to implement this policy, it would be consistent with existing Department of Health guidelines. So we would not be practicing medicine or stepping further out from our expertise than we're doing contact tracing. That's the first point that I think the board needs to understand. As to essential workers or critical infrastructure, Dr. Johnson touched on this, and it's to some extent in this conversation, those are horrible terms, because everybody's essential. I mean, absolutely everyone is essential. And but these are terms, unfortunately, that were developed by the Department of Homeland Security forever ago. And what it means basically is a nerve center or a heartbeat. It's not, there's someone else who can do the job. It's unique to this person. And I do reference that on line 34. The director determines that the employee performs an essential function in support of critical infrastructure, as those terms are used by state and federal agencies. And that's a reference to, so the state government references the CDC, the CDC references the Department of Homeland Security, which has an entire memo that they update constantly about who is critical within any particular government unit. So it's going to look different if you're a power facility versus if you're local law enforcement or whatever else. But as far as the piece on not testing positive, that we can update. When we first drafted this back in late July, early August. That was actually the term of art used by, I think it was the CDC. But because testing technology has improved significantly in the intervening weeks, I think what you're saying makes great sense. We'll change that for sure. And I'll continue to go through and sift this and try to put a finer point on it, just so we're clear and your comfort level is where it needs to be. And I'll say this too. At the end of the day, we're several months into the pandemic, and we haven't needed this yet. Ms. Murray can't be here this evening, but I think one conversation to ask would be, do we forecast needing this? In a large measure, that is an unknowable answer. We simply don't know. And so I think this is good in terms of flexibility, subject to a lot of salt that we sprinkle on this as we apply it. So I will certainly take your thoughts to context and do some redrafting tomorrow and Thursday.
Well, and again, the concern being that this policy will remain after, and so the term essential may change in federal guidelines and state guidelines.
Sure will.
So there can be, all of a sudden we deem essential people that today we're feeling comfortable with the definition. So, but again, this is a no, so thank you for drafting and improving it.
Well, and truthfully, when we started drafting this is how things evolve. When we started drafting this in April, the big concern was from teachers who were saying, I could go into quarantine and out of quarantine and then quarantine and out of quarantine, and I'm going to burn all my leave days, and I'm not going to be sick. What do I do then? And as time evolved, we answered that problem by developing a robust remote opportunity for a lot of employees. So that sort of dropped off the radar screen. And now our attention is turned to different problems. What if a pipe bursts during cold weather? What if our superintendent is quarantined? He's fine, but he has a job to do. What if you're a special ed director and you need to get those filed because you have an IEP meeting tomorrow? There are a lot of continuing operation questions that we have to think about. So thank you for your thoughts. I will definitely massage this and try to get something out for you ASAP.
Just briefly, I do want to echo, I think some revisions on making sure it's clear that no one under this policy will be around students.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
It's a very vague policy as who does it apply to, and I think that's been some of the miscommunication that we've received about it. Just making sure it's real clear about who and who this will apply to. Moving on, we'll go to the Code of Professional Conduct. I think Mr. Smith has
I've got a problem with the timing of this. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in this code. Much of it's been there before. Some of it I think may be new. And I know that our teachers are constantly, kept aware of what's expected of them. But my goodness, the stuff that our teachers have had to go through since we started school, or really since last March, I just question the timing of this. And there's just a lot there that I'm uncomfortable with. As it stands now, there's no way I'd vote yes for it. It would definitely be no. But what I'd like to see happen is that particular policy is removed for now. And let's talk about it in a few months. I just think the timing to even have the conversation is not good.
Dr. Highlander.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, I think what you're saying is you're not necessarily against it, but you think we're throwing too much at our employees all at once right now. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying it ought to be, the timing is horrible. That's what I'm saying.
I have no problem with asking our teachers and educators to behave professionally I've had some people express some concerns to me that what if I go to a party and am acting rather silly and one of my friends posts my picture on social media? And I mean, I don't think that's a problem, is it, Dr. Johnson? But now, if they are representing the school system and speaking as a professional educator, and then they get out of line, then that would be involved in it, if they're being.
Yeah, so, pins on that question too. So, 99.999% of the time is never an issue. There's that 0.00001% where it is. And so Scott has more context on the code pieces, but I'm completely, our people, our teachers, our leaders, the staff that are serving it, they generally speaking, from a professionalism standpoint, when you think about the amount of employees that I have to deal with on a day-to-day, I don't get the direct professionalism complaints because most people that come into the profession.
I guess what I'm saying is, I would want them to behave as a professional. They are entitled to their private life, their social life, obviously. But Mr. Smith may have a good idea. We might should postpone this. So I would look at it more closely a little bit later. We do have a state professional standards that's already in existence that we follow explicitly.
Well, and some of this does, in my opinion anyway,
Redundant.
kind of gets into some of their private life. If we're not real careful with how all this is administered. And so I struggle with that. And again, as much pressure as our teachers have been under for the last 6 months, I just think the time, and now's not the time to make it worse. I mean, maybe I'm crazy here, but.
Well, and certainly, it's the pleasure of the board. I mean, these are the board's policies, it's the pleasure of the board. The impetus of this, though, was, there have been a series of situations, but certainly there was a very significant one this summer where teachers posted things on private social media that had a very significant impact on their ability to relate to their students. And more to the point, there were some specific situations, by relate, I mean, to deal professionally.
I can understand the last sentence that you said, I think it was because of
Oh, well,
I'm sorry.
it's 2020, I'm sorry.
It hurt
So-
your ability
To relate effectively on a professional level to their students.
okay.
So I'm trying to be deliberately vague here. There were some posts made where some people in the school community felt horribly offended. I mean horribly offended. And there was nothing per se wrong about the post, but it created a complication. And so I think the administration wisely handled the situation and said, listen, think about how people view this. You're well within your rights, but as a professional, people judge you by a lot of unseen and very hard to define criteria. And right here, you unintentionally created a barrier between yourself and your community because of things that you had a right to say. Be mindful of that. And so the administration asked me if we could put together something, one place where people could go and see in broad terms what was expected of them. And so if you look at this policy, first of all, there's nothing in here, there's literally nothing in here that has not been part of the teacher's training for the last 2 years. Mary and I did a training video when the Teachers Code of Ethics was first adopted back in 2018. And we touched upon every bit of this. The first 12 and a half minutes we spent talking about professionalism and private use of social media. Because you can put something out there in your private life that implicates your good judgment. And there are some occasions in which that might raise questions about your professionalism. It's not everything, obviously. And as Dr. Johnson said, 99.999% of the time, we'll never know. It's only when something is posted that leaves people thinking, well, wait a minute, how does this person feel about my kid? Or about me, or about my career? And so there's nothing in here that is designed to prohibit people from being on social media. Rather, it's reminding them that they have to think about what they're doing, because what you put out there has implications. Most of this language, by the way, I've lifted straight from the Teacher's Code of Ethics. I've explained it a little bit, and this is an important point I think for the board to understand. I've explained it so that people understand how the administration is already applying the Code of Ethics. So there's nothing in here that comes as the slightest bit of surprise to your Human Resource Department, because they're already following these guidelines. And whenever we have a situation that arises and I have to deal with my colleagues at TEA Legal, there's nothing in here that they find surprising or a little heavy-handed. To your point, your question, Dr. Highlander, if someone takes a picture of you at a party acting silly, well, if you're wearing a Sunny Daisy high school sweatshirt, and it's obviously that you're part of the faculty, Ron the Thurman might get some questions. That has happened. And so if it implicates the profession, then Dr. Johnson might have a conversation with him. That is very different from saying that the conduct is discipline of both. So let me touch on that. And I think some of y'all have had some concerns that some of this language is vague. When you're talking about standards of professional conduct, by definition, it has to be vague, because we can't consider every possible event. But as y'all are aware, at least most of y'all are aware, when the administration actually believes that someone has done something that is unprofessional enough to warrant discipline, it has to come through you for you to certify and say, yeah, I agree, that was unprofessional. So ultimately, you elected non-representatives of the citizens of Hamilton County are the arbiters of whether something is unprofessional enough to warrant discipline. Otherwise, this is just guidance. Think about what you're doing and be smart. And so what we try to do is put in one place somewhere people can read and look at this and understand the public trust that they have. Now, to encourage y'all can look at the training video that we did, because we talked about all of this for 47 minutes. Now, frankly, after now 6 months of Zoom, we've all gotten better at training videos. I'm frankly embarrassed at how badly we did 2 years ago, but we're going to be updating it. But there's nothing in here that we don't touch on extensively. And every teacher has to sign off that he or she has watched that video each and every year. So there's really nothing here that should be a surprise. But again, it's the pleasure of the board. This was developed because the administration was running into things, and it was believed, we need one place where all of our instructional personnel, not just our teachers, but also our educational assistants and our coaches, people who work with kids, they can be reminded you have a high calling, and think about what you're doing. Anyway, I take no pride in authorship. I'm certainly happy to
If I could follow up that,
provide this.
if I could kind of clarify, just a follow-up question. So what we're saying, Dr. Johnson, Scott, is that it's professional and not social.
Correct.
Other than if
Correct.
the social reflects lack of professionalism.
Correct.
Okay, so we're already doing training on this whole scheme every year,
Yes, sir.
everything here. And
Yes,
so you're just saying this policy is needed to clarify to back up your training?
That's exactly right, Dr. Highland. That's well said.
Okay.
Well, but, I noticed just slight nuance to what Steve was saying. That is not how I read this policy, nor is it how I understand your examples, Scott. So Steve has continued to reiterate that it would be related to a teacher's professionalism. So using the example of there's a party and they're wearing a Soggy Daisy t-shirt in a photo, and that would reflect potentially poorly on the school, and therefore be a more clear-cut professionalism question. The examples that you have suggested here and shared in more private conversations, in the perfect place to have those, they are truly more complex core decisions that have chosen to be shared on a public social media. So I think as a board, we need to make sure we're really comfortable with this statement were we to decide to go that way, because we as a board are bound professionally with how we speak about staff, and for the most part, we don't. We speak to Brian, but comes to mind for me are some of the stories that come across the newspaper every few months, where you see some ridiculous thing that somebody did in another county, and you think, oh, thank goodness it's not us. We aren't in the paper this time. And you think, wow, how did that principal in that other county ever think that that was an okay meme to share on social media? And you think, wow, if that was my kid's principal, I would really question if they were really making great choices about how they lead the school, whether they were wearing the t-shirt of that school or not. So to me, there's another layer there, and I wouldn't want us to move forward with this policy with an understanding that was only related specifically to in the doing of their job.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to say it that way. I was interpreting what Dr. Collins said to me, if there's an impact on their professional lives.
Right.
Well,
That's
and
what
it
I
would,
said.
could have an impact. But I do know some of the feedback that I'm getting about concerns is, does that significantly, or does that negatively impact a teacher's First Amendment rights? Which is definitely the question of the day. My understanding from Scott is that with all code of conduct and code of ethics, they are aspirational. This is not as much about discipline as it is about conversation. And I do think social media continues to present a conundrum for all of humanity about what should have been private and what you should and shouldn't say in a split second. And our students have to live with that when their college applications go in and the admissions folks are doing searches and the employers are doing searches on social media. I mean, this stuff follows us. It's real. And it is important that our employees set a solid example. But anyway, I just wanted to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing.
And this will be your point of the First Amendment. I would never advise the administration to terminate someone on the basis of something that is protected by the First Amendment. But the problem that you run into when you're looking at a public employee and the First Amendment is that interplay is very nuanced. And there are times that someone can be speaking out his or her opinion, and it's not protected because of the unique circumstances of what is being shared. And so, yes, there is a tremendous amount of balancing for literally every decision when you're talking about someone's professionalism. And one of the things that Mary and I train on is when you sign your license as whether it's a doctor, or a lawyer, or an educator, you never stop being a professional. Not on the weekend, not when you're out of town, and never when you're relating to students. Now, that doesn't mean that you're under a microscope all the time. What it means is you're carrying that high level of public trust, and that's how we frame it. It's a public trust with an electrician who knows to build a building according to specs. There's no such thing as conduct unbecoming an electrician. With an educator, what an educator does is so nuanced, it is so sacred that with that, you necessarily have to have the trust of the public in order to do your job. And so if you do something that causes the public or a set of parents to say, wait a minute, what's this all about? You have necessarily impacted your ability to reach at least some of those kids. And in one of the code sections, this is from the Tennessee Code of Ethics. This is not from this particular code. It's 1003, the educator's obligation to students. And it says the educator shall, and I'm reading the part, not on the basis of race, color, creed, disability, sex, national origin, marital status, political or religious beliefs, family, social, or cultural background, or sexual orientation unfairly exclude the student from participation in any program. And so, what we try to do here is to spell out, you already have the obligation not to exclude. Don't do anything that might lead someone to feel that they're being excluded, that you have an exclusionary way of looking at the world. And that's the situation we had this summer, where someone was well within her First Amendment rights, just wasn't thinking about the fallout of an otherwise perfectly valid post. And so the administration had to spend a substantial amount of time coaching that person up, and it was a win-win. But it was also one of those times where there was some bruising done that didn't need to happen. And so I personally think that one of the obligations the administration has to the teachers is to spell out as nearly as we can what it's like to teach and what is expected of them. I think being aware of a problem and not educating, not training your teachers to see it and to work around it would be the worst thing that we can do. Because we continue to hold these teachers to the standard. So we need to teach you that standard.
Mr. Chris.
So I just kind of, we're not going to repeat the same things, but, you know, as you said, 99.9%, I would say I'm comfortable with 99.9%, especially when I see references in relation to students, in relation to their job, in relation to, you know, as it comes in relation to these things, I'm comfortable. I'm uncomfortable with 2 lines. Interestingly, it's also the ones that I've received most comment about, which is again the broad and vagueness of a statement of social media missteps. You know, because this is a code of professional conduct, and one cause for dismissal is unprofessional conduct. And therefore, if I'm correct, breaking the code of professional conduct would be considered a potential, not immediate, yes, the board would have to remove it, but a potential cause of dismissal. And so for me, it creates a concern because that's just really broad and the ability to, and I get the fact that somebody may make a statement of which I'm in complete disagreement, it angers me, it makes me mad, but they have a First Amendment right to make that statement, and it's our, you know, it's my duty to support it. And I hear you say you never advise against, you know, basically doing something that will be the case we will do anyways. But that's the line, and the second one, which was also referred to, is, you know, I read the Tennessee Code, and most action involving alcohol has to do with a student, with a relation with students or in a professional setting or wearing a Saudi Daisy high school t-shirt. That never happens in my district, so I don't know why we're picking up here right now. No, anyway, so I just started. But anyway, so in those contexts, absolutely, like, to me, there's no question. I do think, like, I try to think of cases where this fits that I'm like, I see where that'd be a case. If a professional gets a DUI, that matters to me as a board member dealing with that professional. That was a obvious misuse of legal, of alcohol in that case. But the case that comes up is someone's at a party and somebody accuses them of not representing the district well, even though they were. So those two items make me really uncomfortable. You said it perfectly. I feel we're getting into people's private lives, and I would at least say this. I feel that requires a lot of chewing, and I don't feel I've done that yet. I feel like if I'm going to set a policy that can have significant consequences, I want to know, that's going to be long term again, I want to know that we're at the right line of language there that protects a person's First Amendment rights. Outside of this board, somebody else comes in who doesn't agree with any of us and says, well, I think that's a misstep and that's a cause for dismissal, or at the same time with even changing laws around legal drugs that so I just want to say I called you this morning on this one too. Like I'm uncomfortable with some of this language because I feel it's stepping into an area that's a person's right. As a professional, we all know that we have to represent ourselves publicly and privately in a way that brings dignity to the work that we do. I'm not there yet on this policy.
And Mr. Perez, totally understand that. One of the things that the General Assembly has also spoken to is, it has nothing to do with classroom. It has nothing to do with classroom. It says that educators shall conduct themselves in a manner that preserves the dignity and integrity of the education profession. And the State Board of Education, on a lot of its disciplinary decisions, is looking at stuff that happens outside the classroom. It's the repeated DUI. It's the repeated problem with prescription drugs. It's a host of other things. So you're right. We are talking about an educator's private life. We are. Because what we're recognizing is at some level, missteps in the private life can impact your standing as a professional. Whether you're a doctor, a lawyer, or a teacher, or whatever other profession you have where there's not a code of, do this, don't do that. It's much more of this, can we trust this person's good judgment? Let me make a suggestion, because I think you used a phrase that I like a lot, chewing on this. Since the two people who are really the big advocates for this policy, and it seems like I know, but Dr. Towns and Ms. Berg, since they're not here, I think you all would benefit from understanding why they think this matters. Because truthfully, when I say we are already doing this, I'm telling you, we're already doing this. And if y'all haven't gotten complaints about what we're already doing, I think we're doing it right. So I think those two can articulate why this is something that they believe we need to do. The only change about this, honestly, the only change is we're making it explicit that it applies to educational assistants and other non-certificate folks who work with students, like maybe contact employees. So anyway, so maybe what I would suggest to give y'all an opportunity to chew on this 47 minutes. Maybe we look at the training video that we do to increase your comfort level that we're already training to this. And I think you'll get there. If you choose to do it, and if not, quite honestly, there are other existing provisions of state law that the administration would rely on. For example, what I just read about preserving the integrity and the dignity of the profession. They're still going to rely on that. There's an entire section of the law dealing with personal decorum. All we're trying to do is pull together one place so people see the standards that they're already held to. This doesn't change anything. Our intent was to clarify that people understand it's a public trust and it's a big one. But my recommendations to Dr. Johnson and the chair would be that maybe we pull this one and we chew on it and give y'all a chance to educate yourselves talking to Nakia and about why they thought this was, because we were having this conversation in late June, early July about putting this before the board.
Yes, just a couple of things. I did have a couple of calls, but one of them said she was just afraid if she got, there was a party or something, and for a Christmas party, something had a big string in her hand, that she would get reprimanded for that. And I tried to assure you that that's something. Now, if you were at a bar and you had, shots of tequila lined up and people were videoing it, you may have a different issue there. Also, another concern they had was about church. This lady said she's all the time posting pictures of her with her youth group at church, and she was afraid some people would be offended by that and wanted to know if that. And I tried to assure that, that was just not the case. That's not what we're looking at here. And I know we've seen a lot since I've been on this board, that I can see why some of these we need. I mean, seeing these teachers working with thongs on the videos, and it gets to be a little bit raunchy and a little bit bad. And that's not like filming you with your pajamas on, your flannel pajamas in front of the Santa Claus. It's a little bit different situation there. So I think as long as the people understand every case is looked at to see exactly what's going on, because a lot of times what you see is really not what's going on. And if they will get a fair shake at this. But I mean, I can see why we need policy, because since I've been on board, I've seen a lot of really, really bad things. I mean, people on, even back before Facebook was a big deal to see it, on the internet that someone was smoking pot, and showing people and stuff. Stuff like that's just not acceptable. And so, every case has to be looked at individually, like you said, just gets down to professional.
We can't be specific. That's exactly right. We can't be specific about what exactly we're prohibiting, because context matters.
Well, you could say somebody's taking drugs and maybe they were taking their heart pill, or somebody's doing drugs and maybe they're shooting up or something. There's two different things. You have to know in every case exactly what it is. So I think Dr. Johnson would have to look at each one of those on an individual basis. And, we're not out to get people. We're not looking to fire teachers just for no reason at all. But there have been some pretty poor judgment things put out there, I think. And, so I can certainly understand that. Maybe the kind of things that Dr. Town was talking about, I'm not sure.
That's exactly what it is.
Because I have seen some videos been sent to me that are going to get off my phone very quickly. As for me not to be trafficking in pornography, so I can understand some of that.
Ms. Robertson?
Yeah, I don't want to belabor it because so many of you said what I think. And, maybe the answer is to delay it, like Joe initially. I still don't, I do think this is a really hard one because no matter how much you chew on it, it's going to still be really hard to come up with what the right answer is on this. But to your point about talking to Nakia and Ms. Murray about the basis behind this, that was one of my main questions. So I did, I'll call them tomorrow to talk to them more about that. But you made the comment that, this has been going on for a while, and so the policy must be working. I actually think, I want to be really transparent here, that I actually think that that's actually part of the problem, is that a lot of people feel like I've had a lot of calls about teachers feeling like they're retaliating against something that they offer on Facebook, or, they are being targeted in a way for putting something up, that's their opinion. And I think that for me, that's a slippery slope with this policy. And I think, you know, Martha was pointing out that it's the social media language that is just really hard to wrap our heads around. Because I could post something that offends you, Scott, even, you know,
I like it.
well,
Me,
I don't know, I'm gonna try tonight. But my point is that I think that that's what makes this really difficult, and we're not at all speaking of the real issues here, we're just kind of tiptoeing around it. But like the elephant is that like, no, like we're in a very divisive political season of our country. I mean, there's a lot of opinions right now about what people think about every single thing, and you know, it just becomes a question of do you just not post anything at all, or do you actually post something and risk it being construed a certain way? And so, I think actually to a certain degree, you have to start.
I think a lot of it has to do when they do it on school time. That's when a lot of them get in trouble. And that takes care of in the social media thing. They can't be posting stuff on school time.
Isn't that what we're talking about, your school time?
No, I said that's when a lot of people get in trouble.
I want to make sure I understand, because I do feel like we're all.
That's a separate
Okay.
issue, but that's when they get in trouble.
I got it. So I think that we can't be specific in this policy, but we need to figure out how to be as specific as we can.
So to the extent, it's back, to the extent that what we're talking about here is political expression, I have a real hard time imagining a scenario where that would lead to consequences. What we're talking about here are things where a reasonable person looking at this would ask, do we want this person teaching our kids? And I can give you some very specific examples if you like afterwards, because I think I have them saved on my device, where folks have posted things that were beyond the pale. And it's sort of like, you know it when you see it.
I just think that is actually the slippery slope that I'm talking about. And it's hard for me to define that, because I can think of things that would offend me, but then I think about maybe a portion of the community that I represent in District 4, and they maybe wouldn't be offended by that because maybe it's a cultural thing. You know, I mean, I'm just being really honest here, but I actually think that exactly what you just said is the slippery slope that I'm trying to figure out how to skate on with this policy.
So the catch here is always this board is the thermostat for what the professional is doing.
But I've yet to be brought a scenario where I've heard that there has been action taken against a teacher for some type of misconduct. So you say that, but I haven't actually, I don't remember the last time I actually evaluated a teacher's action around something like that.
So generally speaking, you know, if we're doing our job well, which we try to, you won't get those because we deal with them. You know, I think it's very fair for the board to continue to converse about this. I mean, this conversation alone being in the air, I think heightens the awareness of the importance of, you know, professionalism. I think one of the things that we've talked on and on about, and I won't belabor the point either, but because we have been in such a divisive period as a country, and because, you know, on COVID, you know, just everything that we're dealing with, racial tension, you know, all those elements, a presidential election that was, you know, as divided as I've seen, that there has to be a heightened level of sensitivity for professionals that are educators in regards to the impact or implications of things that, you know, they post. And I'm not a social media person, so that's a place in my life where I can get peace. But I think that, you know, I'm always mindful of what you say and what you do and how it could impact others. And when I think about, in particular here from a children's standpoint, that's something just to continue to be considered. But I think it's perfectly appropriate for the board. This is board policy. You know, like we'll continue to operate and deal with situations and circumstances, you know, that come up and arise and navigate them just as we will any other personnel situation. One thing I'll add, that whatever's landed on, part of the part of the benefit of getting it consolidated to something, no matter what's in it, is that it becomes a training mechanism and support for teachers. Because one of the challenges, I go back and think as a teacher, when it's in 52 places, I don't know, what I don't know, and although I would think that it's innate, it may not be the case. So it is nice for them to have it consolidated for training and support purposes, because ultimately we want folks to be successful. So that's,
Yeah, and I'm thinking about what that training support looks like, and when it comes to the social media topic, I'm actually thinking to myself, how do you train somebody around that? Because like literally, you can say anything that would offend the person next to you, and then and I understand, like you're saying, it has to ultimately come down to what the administration considers to be unprofessional and offensive. But again, like, what if a number of parents rally against this teacher because they posted something that that school community doesn't agree with? It just feels like a very slippery slope, and I get it. Why do we come up with a decision around it? And I want everyone to be as professional as possible too. There's just got to be a better answer here, though, than what we have. And yeah, we'll have to keep chewing on it. I don't know a good answer though right now, because it just continues to feel slippery in my head. So if there are also really good policies that somebody else has written around this, like maybe in a different district, I'd like to see it. I don't know if that's something that you have access to. Are we the first ones? We love being the first.
Well, and that, this combines, all these states. I apologize, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Real briefly, thank you, Brian, Dr. Johnson, thank you for your input on that. If I could go back to my graduate days, Dean Hyder was my professor for education law. He's both an attorney from Wake Forest and a North Carolina PhD. And he gave two succinct examples for teachers. They're outside the profession. He said, one, it's a classic he learned in law school. You cannot go into a meeting and say, fire. That's not free speech. And anything that hurts the safety of a child is not free speech. And it's not, am I correct, Mr. Bennett? Also, the second example he gave of a profession was of an airline pilot. Does he have the right to go out and drink on his own time? Sure he does, but not within 12 hours of flying 300 people on a mass transit airplane.
They
So-
are, I bought it for all, I have a brother that's a pilot.
Right. So what I'm saying is,
It's 8 hours?
I also asked Mr. Bennett about First Amendment. Did I not, Mr. Bennett? I did. I am concerned with our employees' First Amendment rights, very much so. But also, and I think the impetus, and I want to hear what Ms. Murray and Dr. Towns said, the impetus is what could hurt families and children. We need, and professionals need to watch out. Thank you.
Make my point for me, we've been discussing this for 45 minutes, and I feel if we move forward with this, we're going to create a firestorm with our teachers. And I just think it's a bad time.
We don't table this, is that what we want to do?
yeah, I think it's
We don't table
board.
it? Can we say,
Well,
we
not
can't do that till the meeting. We can't just take off the agenda?
The executive committee owns the agenda until
we can pull it.
Thursday night.
Okay, so we can't just take off the agenda. They
Yeah, that's
can
up to
take it
them.
off the board.
Well, we can pull it if the board, what I'm hearing from
Two
citizens.
people, you gotta have two folks that they want something. I know you gotta have two to have something to put on, you gotta have two to have something to put off.
No.
No, that's
If,
Well, I'm just not gonna belabor the point, but I do have a couple of comments on this. I think we're probably right in probably delaying this, but I think it's healthy to have the conversation around it, because at some point in time, we're gonna have to do this. So, a couple things that have been said, and I think we are going down that slippery slope, like Mr. Robinson said. The one thing that really sticks out to me is our language in here. It says employees must. And I'm not a lawyer, but it seems like must is the new shall. And so it's a requirement. And that's where I get a little bit, we call this an aspirational policy, where we get a little bit of kind of outside of our lines, because if you read some of these literals, it could very much be like what Ms. Robinson said. Parents do not like what this teacher posted, said, or tweeted, or whatever. They come and make the thing. According to this policy, they created a barrier, but it's well within their First Amendment right. That's just a thing, a side note or kind of thing I wanted to point out. But I think, you know, in some respect, I think we really need to look at using that must language, maybe should or something. I know we have a social media policy. You know, do we beat that up and, you know, make it social media best practices and come? It's just incredibly vague. And if I was a teacher, I would be sitting there saying, what can I do? What can I do? You know.
Yes, sorry, real quick, just, if we have a social media policy, how do we talk about social media in this policy?
We do have a social
No,
media
we
policy.
do.
We do, and it's actually probably more strict than what I put in this one.
Yeah.
And y'all have already approved it. This deals with the code of ethics as it applies to the profession, as it applies to students. And by the way, the code of ethics says shall. And most of what I have in here, an educator must, I just looked it up in the code where it says an educator shall. I just changed shall to must. So, I mean, all I'm doing is following state law. But to your question, Ms. Robinson, why do we have both? This is broader than just the social media. But you can't speak to an educator's relationship to students in the community and not touching social media. We could pull it out, and I think an application would be the exact same thing. But I think when we consider how much of a hot button social media sometimes is, I think for us not to try to tackle it would be a little tone deaf. And is it vague? It has to be. Because there's no way you can draw a policy that's specific to things. We haven't thought of that. Again, when you're talking about professional stamping, electrical codes can be specific. You've got to use 12-gauge wire. Professional codes are different because you're talking about someone's behavior. There are some things that I expect, you know, when I was growing up, my parents expected me to do. There are certain things that I expect my kids to do. But as a professional, there are very few things that I'm told I have to do. I have to pay my professional privilege tax by some time. I must not play with my funds. Everything else is really, you know, you must do this. It's broad stuff. To some extent, I'll be honest.
I just know some of the corporate ones that I've seen that are professional conduct, they use the word should. You know, I know it's not a teacher, and it doesn't carry the same weight.
If we need to, we change it to should. I mean, if that increases your comfort level, then.
I mean, it might not matter. I'm on the same train. That I think it's a slippery slope, and something that we need to kill.
And any time you're looking at some personal, you have to ask the question. Has this impacted the professional realm? And sometimes even if it does, the guy goes to the speaker. Yeah, I mean, I agree that this is by definition dicey, which is why when you look out there, you're not going to find a whole lot of districts that have professional codes of conduct. Just don't.
Okay, moving on, do we have anything on the student teachers policy? The legal services report? Any events or announcements? Okay, we will adjourn.